Hi, I'm the son who got nothing. That's what I used to tell people, half joking, half swallowed in shame. When my father died, my stepmother threw a gala. She inherited $46 million, 5 properties, 3 cars. And she handed me an old briefcase, cracked, empty, like me. Then she laughed. "Just like your father," she said. Pathetic. A man with dreams and no spine. I almost walked away, but there was a card inside that case. No name, just a number. And when I called it, the voice on the other end said, "Sir, we've been waiting 18 years for this call." What came next? Well, it tore the mask off everything I thought I knew. So ask yourself, what would you do if your family buried the truth with your father? It was one of those Philadelphia mornings where the air bites just enough to remind you that summer's long gone, the kind of cold that sneaks through your sleeves no matter how much you pretend it doesn't. I parked outside Vale & Reeves Legal Associates, staring at the marble steps as if they might swallow me whole. I hadn't been here since my father was alive. Inside, everything gleamed. Polished floors, framed degrees, quiet voices, the smell of coffee and disinfectant. It was exactly the kind of place he liked, cold, expensive, and controlled. I walked down the hall to the conference room, my shoes echoing like I didn't belong there. They were already seated when I entered. Marjorie Vale, my stepmother, was dressed in cream, head to toe, not a wrinkle on her face or her suit. Next to her sat her son, Eli, lounging like a prince who already owned the kingdom. Across the table, the lawyer, Harold Keene, shuffled his papers, pretending not to notice the tension. Marjorie smiled that sharp smile I'd known since I was 15. "Oh, Callum, you made it," she said sweetly. "We thought you'd moved on from the family." I nodded once. "Traffic," I replied, though there hadn't been any. I took the empty seat at the far end of the table. The table was covered with boxes, jewelry, documents, even an antique clock. Everything neat, expensive. Except for one thing sitting apart from the rest, a cracked leather briefcase, brown and dusty, like it had been dragged out of an attic. The lawyer cleared his throat. "We'll begin." He read the formalities in a monotone, like he'd done this 1,000 times before. Then his voice shifted, slower, careful. "To my wife, Marjorie Vale, and her son, Eli Vale, I leave the remainder of my estate, totaling $46 million and all physical properties." Marjorie didn't even blink. Eli leaned back, smirking. The lawyer continued. "To my son, Callum Reeves." He paused. I felt the room glance my way. "I leave the contents of my personal briefcase." Silence. Eli snorted before he could stop himself. Marjorie's smile widened. "Just like your father. Sentimental and useless," she murmured. "Guess he left you paperwork," Eli added, not bothering to hide his grin. I kept my voice steady. "Can I take it now?" Marjorie gestured dismissively. "It's yours, darling. All yours." I reached for the briefcase. The lock broke off in my hand, scattering a puff of dust across my sleeve. The lawyer coughed awkwardly. Marjorie covered her mouth with one manicured finger, pretending to be concerned. "Careful, Callum," she said. "It might have termites." The words landed harder than she probably expected. I brushed the dust off, stood up slowly. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Keene." "Of course, Mr. Reeves," the lawyer murmured, not meeting my eyes. As I turned toward the door, Marjorie's voice followed me. "You know, Callum," she called, "some people inherit worth. Others just inherit dust." I stopped just for a moment but didn't look back. My hand tightened on the cracked handle. It felt warm, oddly alive, like something breathing beneath the leather. Outside, the wind stung. I walked past the row of black cars and climbed into my old sedan. For a minute, I just sat there, breathing through the humiliation. The briefcase sat on the passenger seat, silent and heavy. I thought about the last time I'd seen my father, Christmas, maybe 10 years ago. He'd said almost nothing that night, just patted my shoulder like he was touching a stranger. Marjorie had poured wine, laughed too loudly, corrected him when he called me by my nickname. He never called again. I rested my hand on the briefcase. It was scratched, the seams frayed. A smell of cedar and machine oil lingered, faint but familiar. I remembered being 12, carving my initials into the back of his wooden chair in the workshop. That chair was gone now, replaced by glass furniture and white walls. Even the wood forgot me. I opened the briefcase. It creaked like a sigh. Inside, only one thing: a small yellowed business card. No logo, no name, just a phone number typed in fading ink. I almost laughed. $46 million to them, and I got a phone number. I turned it over, half expecting to find a note. But there was nothing. I nearly tossed it into the glove compartment. Then I caught the scent again. The cedar, the faint oil, his scent. I hesitated, then took out my phone. My thumb hovered over the keypad. This was insane, but I dialed. It rang once. Then a calm male voice answered. "Hello, sir. We've been waiting 18 years for your call." I froze. My breath caught. "Who are you?" A pause. "The man your father trusted most." The phone was suddenly heavy in my hand. Outside, a car horn blared, sharp and distant. My pulse pounded in my ears. "What do you mean, waiting?" I asked. The voice lowered, deliberate. "Mr. Reeves, your father left something unfinished." I didn't know what frightened me more: his certainty, or the way it stirred something deep in me I thought had died a long time ago. I sat there in the car, still holding the phone to my ear, though the line had gone quiet. The rain had started up again, light at first, pattering against the windshield like a soft warning. I lowered the phone and looked at the card in my lap. The address was scribbled on the back in my own handwriting, the ink slightly smudged by my fingers. Lancaster, a sawmill, 2 hours away. I stared through the windshield, my breath fogging the glass. The sky outside was a pale gray blanket, the kind of day that never quite wakes up. Every reasonable part of me wanted to drive home, toss the briefcase in a closet, and forget this whole circus ever happened. But something wouldn't let me. I thought of the look on Marjorie's face as the lawyer read my name. That smug, silent glee like she'd finally erased the last shadow of my father that wasn't hers. I remembered Eli, laughing like I was some kind of joke. The phone call hadn't given me peace. It had thrown a match on something that had been smoldering in my gut for years. I turned the key in the ignition. The engine coughed to life. I adjusted the seat, set the GPS, and started driving west. The first hour passed in silence. The road stretched long and flat, flanked by rust-colored trees shedding the last of their leaves. My fingers drummed against the steering wheel. I tried to shake off the tension, but it clung to me like static. Somewhere just past Elizabethtown, hunger and fatigue caught up with me. I pulled into a roadside diner, one of those old places that's seen more midnight coffee and heartbreak than it deserves. The neon sign buzzed above the door. Inside, it smelled like bacon grease and old vinyl booths. A woman in her 60s with a name tag that read Darlene poured me coffee before I could sit. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said without judgment. I managed a half smile. "Maybe I have." I slid into a corner booth and dropped the briefcase beside me. Its cracked leather caught her eye. "That thing's been through a lot," she said. "You could say that." She nodded like she understood more than she let on, then walked away, leaving me alone with the coffee and my thoughts. Something tugged at me. I reached for the briefcase again, hesitated, then opened it. The inside was lined in faded green felt, stiff with age, but something looked off. There was a tear in the lining along the back panel. I slipped my fingers inside, felt tape, and pulled gently. A thin envelope came free, taped to the inner wall, hidden for who knows how long. I opened it carefully. Inside was a single photograph. My father, looking 20 years younger, stood beside a tall man with a salt and pepper beard. Both of them were smiling, standing in front of a building sign that read, "Reeves and Vale, Workshop and Design, 1985. I stared at. The name, Vale. Same as Marjorie and Eli. Same as the law office. So this wasn't just a marriage. It had started as a business, and maybe ended as a betrayal. I turned the photo over. In my father's unmistakable handwriting, just 6 words. "Not everything I built has your name missing." I sat back, the breath leaving me in a quiet rush. So many years I spent thinking he'd forgotten me, pushed me aside, but now I wasn't so sure. The rain picked up again as I left the diner. Darlene gave me a look on the way out, a kind that said, "Take care," though she didn't say it aloud. The GPS led me down narrower roads, past bare cornfields and shuttered barns, until finally it announced, "You've arrived." But there was nothing there, just a rusted gate and a path through overgrown trees. The sawmill stood at the end of it, weather-beaten and leaning slightly like an old man refusing to fall. Its metal roof sagged and one window flickered with weak yellow light. I parked and stepped out, boots crunching wet gravel. The air smelled of wood rot and damp earth. I hesitated at the door, then pushed it open. Inside, it was warmer than expected. A small space had been cleared, dust brushed away, a single lamp standing in the center, next to a folding table, and then a voice behind me. "You called." I turned. The man from the photo. He stepped forward, tall and deliberate. A gray beard now covered the jawline I'd seen in the picture, but the eyes were the same, sharp, steady. "Your father told me you would," he said. I swallowed hard. "Who are you?" "Name's Thomas Hale. I was your father's partner, until Marjorie made sure I vanished." He extended a folder to me, thick, old. "This is the real will," he said. "The one that disappeared from the lawyer's office the night before the reading." I took it with shaking hands, opened it slowly. Inside were notarized documents, stamped and signed, contracts, trust declarations, records, all bearing my father's name. My name. Wasn't about jewelry or real estate. It was something bigger. Reeves Design Trust. A company, a fund, a legacy. Hidden. Protected. For me. "They thought they erased you," Thomas said, voice hardening. "Your father made sure that could never happen." I couldn't speak. For the first time in years, I didn't feel lost. I felt chosen. When I finally looked up from the folder, Thomas Hale was gone, and outside, someone was watching my car. I didn't wait. The moment I spotted that silhouette through the fogged glass, still as a gravestone, standing near my car, I shoved the folder into my satchel, snatched the briefcase, and made for the back exit of the sawmill. The wood floor groaned beneath my feet, but I didn't look back. I just moved. Outside, the rain came down heavier now, cold, persistent, biting. I cut through the trees behind the mill, slipping in the wet underbrush, branches clawing at my coat. my shoes soaked through in minutes. By the time I made it around to my car, the figure was gone, but fresh boot prints in the mud told me they hadn't been just a shadow. 2 quick flashes of headlights blinked from across the lot. They weren't mine. Whoever was behind the wheel wanted me to know they were still there. I got in, heart pounding, hands shaking just enough to fumble the keys. I shoved them into the ignition and turned. The engine stuttered, then caught. I reversed without checking. Gravel skidded under the tires. And I tore out onto the road with headlights cutting through sheets of rain. In my rearview mirror, they followed. No lights at first, just the vague blur of a vehicle behind me. Then, suddenly, high beams, full and blinding. My rearview flared white, and I had to squint to stay between the faded lines of the country road. "Don't panic," I whispered to myself. "You've been chased before. Just not like this." I made a hard left onto an unpaved stretch of road, the wheels kicking up stones. For a second, it felt like I might lose them, until I saw the glow of their beams bouncing off the trees in my mirror again. Still there, still closing. I drove without music, without breathing. Just the slap of the wipers, the growl of the engine, and my pulse loud in my ears. Finally, a break in the trees. A junction. I turned again, this time onto an old maintenance path used more by deer than vehicles. The road curved up, narrow and slick. After a mile, their headlights disappeared, but I didn't stop. I kept going until the road merged onto the highway again. Another 30 minutes passed in silence before I saw a vacancy sign flickering through the storm. Maple Inn, barely lit, barely standing, but it was shelter. I pulled in, engine steaming, wipers still ticking. Inside, the lobby smelled like old fabric and rain. The woman at the desk looked like she'd seen 10,000 tired men before me and wasn't surprised to see one more. "No ID needed," she said, handing me a key with a faded tag. "Storm like this? No one asks questions." I managed a nod. "Appreciate it." "You look like you've been through something," she added gently. "You have no idea." "Most men who say that," she replied, "end up right." Room 5 was small. 1 bed, 1 lamp, 1 window with a curtain that didn't quite cover it. I set the briefcase on the table, locked the door behind me, and finally allowed myself to sit. Then the phone buzzed, a voicemail, unknown number. I tapped play. "If you're hearing this," Hale's voice began, "I might not make it back. They found me sooner than I expected. Look inside the folder's back flap. Your father left you a code." I turned toward the satchel, heart in my throat. The folder lay half open where I dropped it on the bed. I peeled back the lining, and there, tucked between layers of cardboard, was a small slip of paper. 6 handwritten words. "Cedar remembers. Vault 12. My breath caught. "Cedar," I whispered. I hadn't heard that word in years, not since I was 15, standing in the workshop, watching my father shape wood like it was something alive. "Smell that?" he'd said once, holding a sanded plank to my face. "Cedar lasts longer than steel. It hides, but it never rots." His voice echoed now, through decades. I grabbed my phone, searched Cedar Line Design. The business was still listed, though marked inactive. The address? Philadelphia County, tied to a warehouse facility not far from the outskirts of the city. Vault 12. I stared at the ceiling, the storm outside muffled by the thin motel walls. My mind raced, but for the first time since the funeral, it wasn't from grief. It was from connection. A trail. A real one. I was starting to see how deep this went. The room creaked. I sat up straight. Then, 3 slow knocks. Someone at the door. I didn't move. I watched the knob. Nothing. A second later, a small rectangle of paper slid beneath the doorframe. I crept forward, picked it up. Just one line. Typed, "You're not supposed to find him. Stop digging or you'll end up like Hale." I flung the door open. No one. But muddy footprints, fresh and clear, led down the hallway and disappeared around the corner. I stood there for a long moment, every nerve on edge. And then something shifted in me. The old fear cracked open, but not into panic, into something else. Defiance. They thought I'd back off, that I'd hide. But I knew better now. My father hadn't left me scraps. He'd left me a puzzle. And puzzles? I'd always been good at those. For the first time since the funeral, I felt something stronger than fear. Purpose. The sun had just begun to rise when I pulled onto Delaware Avenue. The city was still quiet, the kind of quiet that only happens before the world wakes up and starts pretending again. The warehouse sat hunched at the edge of the industrial district, half swallowed by creeping ivy and rust. A crooked steel sign hung from one hinge, the faded letters barely legible. Cedar Line Design Storage Units. My father had built things meant to last. Even the ghosts of his work were holding on. I parked around the side under the shadows of an overgrown loading dock. The engine clicked as it cooled. I sat for a moment longer than I should have, palms resting on the steering wheel, grounding myself. Inside, the air was thick with dust and old wood. The scent of cedar hit me again. Warm, stubborn, like memory refusing to fade. Rows of metallic units stretched down the hall, each humming faintly beneath the low fluorescent lights. A desk sat near the front, behind it an older man in a flannel jacket, sipping from a dented thermos. His name tag read, Ray. He looked up when I entered. "You sure you got clearance for this, son?" I pulled out my ID, the last piece of anything official I still carried from my father's estate. It wasn't much, but it bore his name and mine together. "Vault 12, I said. "I'm here to close my father's account." Ray raised an eyebrow. "Haven't heard that number in years. Thought nobody'd ever come back for it." He reached under the counter, grabbed a ring of keys heavy enough to anchor a boat, and gestured for me to follow. Our footsteps echoed as we walked down the corridor. "Some people leave behind tools," he muttered. "Others leave behind messes." We stopped in front of Vault 12. The lock was old, crusted with time. Ray handed me the key without a word. When the bolt turned and the door groaned open, the scent of cedar nearly overwhelmed me. Inside was a world frozen in time. Blueprints lined the walls, thick rolls stacked high, labeled in my father's handwriting. Wooden models, some half-assembled, sat beneath plastic covers. Old tools gleamed from the workbench, well-maintained despite the years. At the back stood a desk, and on it, a single-framed photo. I stepped closer. My father, younger, standing tall beside Marjorie and Hale, the three of them smiling, genuinely, it seemed, in front of a massive wooden structure. The caption on the frame read, "The Reeves Legacy Wing, 1998. But what drew my eye was the carved wooden chest beneath the desk, polished, dark. My father's initials burned into the top, SR. My hands trembled slightly as I lifted the lid. Inside, stacks of ledgers, handwritten notes, contracts, sealed envelopes. And sitting atop them all, a black VHS tape. Its label read, "Partnership Dissolution, 2007. I scanned the room and spotted a dusty old TV and VCR combo on a shelf in the corner. I plugged it in. The screen flickered to life with a high-pitched whine. I inserted the tape. The image was grainy, jittery, but the sound was clear. My father's voice came through first. "You forged my name, Marjorie. I never signed those papers." Her response was ice. "You never had vision, Silas. You built for pride. I build for legacy." Then came Hale, stepping between them, trying to calm the argument. "Stop this," he said. "You're both burning down everything you built." The camera jolted. Someone knocked it. The screen went to static. I stared at the snowstorm on the screen, the remote slipping from my hand. The tape clicked. It ejected itself. Taped to the bottom of the cassette was a small note. "If you're watching this, they already buried the truth. Protect what's left." My stomach clenched. My phone rang. No caller ID, but I knew. I answered. "You've been busy." Eli's voice came smooth as oil. "Next time, knock before opening family property." I stayed silent. "You left your car in plain view of a security camera," he continued. "Didn't your father teach you better?" "How did you—" "Callum," he interrupted. "Dad left me one great lesson. Don't dig up graves unless you're ready to lie in one." Click. The line went dead. I stared at the screen for a long time, listening to the silence fill the room. Then, slowly, I gathered what mattered. The tape, the note, one of the old cedar carvings shaped like the arm of a chair. I slipped them into my satchel. As I turned to leave, I looked around the vault one last time. "You tried to erase him," I said under my breath, "but you left the scent of cedar everywhere." I locked the unit behind me. The hallway was still empty. Ray was gone. The place had that quiet you only hear in early mornings in the old secrets. Outside, the street was wet, but the rain had eased to a drizzle. I was halfway to my car when a black SUV crawled past the lot. Windows tinted. No plates I could see. It didn't stop, didn't speed up either. Just moved like it was waiting for something. Or someone. I stood there with my keys in my hand, cedar dust clinging to my coat sleeves. The scent stayed with me all day. A quiet reminder. And I knew it was time to bring that scent back into their perfect, perfumed world. I drove the familiar road without music, without noise, just the steady hum of the tires and the distant rumble of a coming storm. The scent of cedar still clung to my sleeves, the kind of scent that didn't just stay on clothes. It stuck in your lungs, in memory. By the time I reached the gates of the estate, dusk had settled into a heavy golden hue, the kind that made everything look more expensive than it was. The gravel crunched under my wheels as I pulled in, the mansion standing like a portrait, perfect, still, and colder than I remembered. The front door opened before I could knock. A housemaid, Elsie, stepped into the light. She had worked here since before my mother passed. Her face, now weathered with time, broke into a mix of confusion and something close to relief. "Mr. Reeves," she said, voice low. "Mrs. Vale didn't mention—" "She will," I replied, stepping past her gently. Inside, nothing had changed. Every surface gleamed, every flower too perfectly placed. This house had always felt staged, a set built to impress, not to live in. From the landing above, I heard the soft clink of glass. "Callum," Marjorie said, descending the stairs like she was floating, a full glass of wine in hand, pearl earrings catching the light. "What a surprise." I met her smile with calm. "You always did enjoy surprises, didn't you?" We moved to the drawing room without another word. She took her place by the fireplace, curling into the same chair she'd claimed the week after my father's funeral. I sat across from her, leaving my coat on. The VHS tape pressed against my side, wrapped in a cloth, hidden in my pocket. I heard, she began, swirling her wine. You've been poking around some old warehouses, looking for ghosts? Something like that, I said. Funny thing about ghosts, they don't show up unless someone still owes them something. Her smile tightened. The room fell into an eerie rhythm of stillness, the kind before a storm breaks loose. Then Eli appeared, as smug as ever, walking in like he owned every inch of the carpet. Look who finally showed up, he said, draping an arm over the back of the couch. Still chasing that sentimental inheritance, brother? I kept my voice level. Not chasing, just reclaiming what's mine. Eli scoffed. You always did have trouble letting go of scraps. And you always mistook silence for weakness. That got his attention. Marjorie interjected, her tone sharpening just slightly. Careful, Callum. You don't want to make enemies you can't afford. I leaned forward. You mean like the ones Dad didn't realize he was sleeping next to? For a split second, her composure cracked, just a flicker, but I saw it. She set her wine down with a quiet, deliberate click. Your father was a kind man, she said, but he trusted too easily. That was always his flaw. Right, I said. And his biggest mistake was letting you close enough to correct it. Eli shot to his feet. You don't talk to my mother like that. I didn't flinch. Then sit down before I remind you whose name is on the original foundation plaque. Spoiler, it's not yours. For the first time, he hesitated. His hand curled into a fist, but he didn't move. As tension thickened in the room, a memory slid through me, quiet but steady. My father, the last night I saw him lucid, sitting in his old cedar chair, coughing into a handkerchief, his eyes cloudy but his voice clear. If you ever feel erased, son, build something they can't rename. It had sounded like regret back then. Now it felt like instruction. Marjorie watched me closely, sensing the shift. You think you can just walk back in here, she said, throw around some dusty cassette and rewrite the story? I reached into my coat and placed the VHS tape on the glass table between us. You remember this? Her fingers twitched, barely, then stilled. You're bluffing, she said. I smiled, slow. You should know by now. I learned from the best. She didn't respond. She just stared at the tape like it might detonate. I stood. I won't take up more of your evening, I said, adjusting my coat. Next time, I won't knock. As I turned to leave, her voice followed me. You think you can threaten me with memories? I didn't turn around. No, I said. I'll threaten you with proof. Elsie was waiting quietly by the door, as if she'd never moved. Drive safe, Mr. Reeves, she said softly as I stepped out. I didn't answer. I didn't have to. Rain had started again, soft and steady, by the time I reached my car. As I backed out onto the long drive, lightning cracked the sky behind the mansion. I glanced into the rearview mirror, and there she was, Marjorie, standing at the window, pale, one hand on the curtain, the other holding a phone to her ear. I didn't speed that night, but I didn't crawl either. I drove just fast enough to stay ahead of whatever I imagined was coming down that dark stretch of road behind me. The rain had slowed, but my thoughts hadn't. By the time I got back to the city, the skyline of Philadelphia was waking up. A dull orange glow crept between buildings like an afterthought. I hadn't slept. My shirt clung to me in places where sweat had dried and dried again. I didn't go home. I couldn't. Instead, I parked near a cafe I used to stop at with Dad when I was in high school. Same chipped blue door. Same smell of burnt toast and dark roast. Inside, the TVs were already murmuring above the counter. I ordered a black coffee, no sugar, and took a seat by the window. And that's when I heard his name. Local businessman Thomas Hale was found dead in his vehicle last night, just off Route 30. The reporter's voice was clean, detached. She continued while a blurry image of Hale's truck played behind her on the screen. Authorities suspect brake failure. The vehicle reportedly collided with a guardrail. Investigation ongoing. I froze. The cup in my hand felt heavier than it should have. My knuckles were white against the ceramic. Brake failure? He'd had the truck serviced less than a week ago. He told me himself it was running better than it had in years. My chest tightened. That voicemail. If you're hearing this, I might not make it back. He'd known. I didn't hear the bell above the cafe door. But I noticed the woman when she sat down across from me like she'd known me her whole life. "You're Reeves's boy, right?" she asked, voice raspy, eyes sharp. I didn't answer right away. Just stared. "Depends," I said. "Who's asking?" "Name's Nora Reyes, retired detective. Thomas was my friend. Told me if something ever happened, I'd find a man with a briefcase and too many questions." She reached into her coat, pulled out a flash drive, and slid it across the table. "He left this with me 3 weeks ago," she said. "Said you'd know what to do with it. And one more thing. He said if you showed up, the storm had already started." I picked up the drive without a word. It was cold, smooth. I tucked it into my pocket. "You believe he was murdered?" She stared down into her coffee for a beat. "You ever seen brakes give out on a straight road? No rain, no skid marks, no debris?" I didn't answer. "Then yes," she said. "I do." She stood up, left cash on the table, and paused before walking away. "Careful, son," she said without turning around. "Truth gets slippery when money's involved." I sat there for another 15 minutes, not drinking, just thinking. Then I got in my car and started driving. I didn't have a destination in mind. Just let the streets carry me through the city, like a vein through a body that was sick and didn't know it yet. At some point, I found myself parked near the river, same place Dad used to take me fishing when I was a kid. The kind of silence there that made you face things you'd been avoiding. I leaned back in the seat, closed my eyes, and heard her voice again. "Marjorie, be careful who you make your enemies." Hale was dead, and maybe I could have stopped it, maybe not, but guilt crept in anyway. I clenched the steering wheel hard enough for the leather to creak. "No," I whispered, "you don't get to win twice." Later that evening, I plugged the USB into my laptop. I hadn't planned to open it at home, but instinct told me I was already being watched no matter where I went. The screen blinked. 2 files appeared. One was a zipped folder titled Cedarline Trust to our original records. Password protected. The other was a video file. I hit play. There was Thomas Hale, seated in what looked like a hotel room, the curtains drawn, light dim. "Callum," he began, voice low, measured. "If you're watching this, I didn't make it, and I'm sorry." He looked down for a moment, then back at the camera. "Your father didn't lose the company. It was taken. Marjorie and Eli funneled the funds through a shell corporation. The name you need to find is Phoenix 46. It links everything." His voice faltered just slightly. "I kept a copy of the final transfer file. It's in the archive folder. Password hints in the ledger inside Vault 12. You saw it already. You just don't know it yet." Then static. But just before it cut completely, a faint whisper, almost lost in the white noise. "They're here." I stared at the screen, heart thudding in my throat. Phoenix 46. I whispered it out loud, like it might unlock something just by being spoken. That night, I sat at my kitchen table and began to plan. Every contact I still trusted, every record I needed to track down, every thread of the puzzle I had to pull, because this wasn't just about inheritance anymore. This was about taking back the truth they buried with my father, and I intended to do it in the most public way possible. 2 nights passed in a blur of planning. I barely slept. My phone stayed in airplane mode. Reyes and I met in quiet places, under bridges, in parking lots, inside her cousin's nail salon after hours. Every step had to be deliberate. One wrong move, and they'd silence me like they did Hale. But tonight, I wasn't playing defense anymore. At 6:45 p.m., I stood across the street from the Fairmont Grand Hotel. From the outside, it glowed like a cathedral, tall glass windows, white columns, valet lines dotted with luxury cars. Just beneath the surface, though, I knew the rot ran deep. I wore my father's favorite suit color, deep charcoal, a subtle nod only Marjorie would catch. Silver cufflinks I'd found in Vault 12. My name wasn't on the guest list, but a crisp 100 to the valet bought me enough confidence to walk in like I was expected. The lobby was flooded with designer gowns, fake laughter, and the quiet clinking of stemware. On every wall hung banners reading, "The Vail Foundation for the Arts, honoring vision and legacy." Legacy. I kept moving. Down the service corridor, past the kitchen doors, Reyes was waiting in a black blazer and headset. She handed me a small earpiece and a discreet remote. "You've got 10 minutes, she said, tone clipped. "Maybe less. After that, they'll shut the feed." I took the device and slipped it into my jacket. "You ready for this?" she asked. "No," I said truthfully. "But my father didn't raise a coward." She gave a small nod. "Good, because they're about to choke on the name they tried to erase." I waited by the ballroom entrance, watching through the archway as the crowd settled. Soft jazz drifted from the stage. Eli was already holding court near the champagne tower, tossing his head back in laughter like he owned the night. Marjorie stood center stage, poised like a queen, glass of rosé in hand. The lights dimmed slightly. A hush spread through the crowd. She stepped to the microphone, voice smooth as cream. "Good evening. I'm so pleased to welcome you to our annual celebration of vision, family, and..." I stepped into the light. Heads turned. Whispers rippled. Marjorie froze mid-sentence, her smile faltering for a blink before recovering. "Callum," she said, lips barely moving. "What a..." "Surprise." I didn't wait for an invitation. "Since we're talking about vision," I said, calm but loud enough to carry, "why don't we show everyone what the original Reeves legacy really looked like?" I pulled the remote from my pocket and pressed play. Behind her, the giant ballroom screen flickered. At first, static. Then, VHS footage. There was my father, Silas Reeves, on screen, pacing, angry, pointing at Marjorie. "You forged my signature," his voice boomed over the room. "You sold the land behind my back." Marjorie's younger self replied coldly, "You never understood. Expansion. You were building sawdust castles in a digital world." Then Hale's voice trying to interject, then static again. The crowd gasped. Whispers turned into murmurs, then outrage. Marjorie's voice cracked, louder now. "Turn that off! Security!" She snapped her fingers toward the back of the room, but no one moved. Some of the staff were ours. Some just wanted to see what came next. I raised my hand calmly. "You can shut off the screen, but you can't unsend the emails. Every person in this room just received a copy of that video, courtesy of the Reeves Trust. You could hear a pin drop. Eli came storming through the crowd, eyes bloodshot, face flushed. "You think this makes you some kind of hero?" he spat. "You're a washed-up charity case with a dead man's last name." I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "And you're a petty crook hiding behind your mother's pearls. But don't worry, your name's on the shell accounts too. Phoenix 46 ring a bell?" He paused. Just for a second. Enough. From the crowd, one of the board members rose, a tall man in his 60s with a tight jaw and expensive glasses. "Mrs. Vale," he said, voice slow and firm. "Is this true? Were these documents altered?" Marjorie didn't answer. She couldn't. Her face was pale now, lips pressed into a thin line. "You think a tape makes a case?" she hissed at me, voice shaking. "You don't know what you're playing with." "No," I replied, staring straight at her. "But I know what my father lost. And tonight, so does everyone else." She lunged forward, maybe for the remote, maybe for my throat. She didn't get far. Her heel caught the edge of the platform. She slipped. The wine glass shattered as she hit the floor. The gasp from the audience was immediate, and the flashbulbs even faster. Security finally stirred. Reyes, standing by the audio booth, gave me a nod. "We got what we need," she mouthed. I turned and walked away. No rush, no fear. Out on the balcony, the air was cold, clean, and mercifully quiet. Below, the city pulsed like a sleeping giant. Reyes joined me, slipping a coat over her shoulder. "You just nuked the Vale Empire," she said. "Not yet," I replied. "But tomorrow, we finish the job." We stood there a long moment, two shadows on the edge of something bigger. That night, every news channel in Philadelphia said the same name, and for the first time in years, it was mine. By dawn, it had changed everything. I woke to the sound of my phone buzzing nonstop on the nightstand. It had started sometime around 4 a.m. and hadn't let up since. Missed calls, voicemails, texts from names I hadn't seen in years. High school classmates, foundation staff, a former board member from Reeves and Vale. Then came the headlines. "Charity Queen under fire. Fraud allegations rocked the Vale Foundation." Silas Reeves' son breaks years of silence in stunning public confrontation. I sat up slowly. The sunlight filtering through the blinds looked softer than usual, like the city itself hadn't figured out what to make of the shift. Then the phone rang again. "Unknown number," I answered. "You think this is over?" Marjorie's voice came through ice cold. "You really think some amateur theatrics at a hotel ballroom can undo me?" I stayed quiet. "I gave you a life, a name, a seat at a table you never earned. And this is how you thank me?" "You didn't give me anything," I said evenly. "You taught me how to pretend, but now I'm done pretending." There was a pause. I could hear her sip something, probably that same red wine she used to hold like a scepter. "You're not ready for what's coming," she said, her voice suddenly low. "Be careful who you humiliate in public, Callum. People like me don't fall quietly." And then she hung up. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The war had already begun. By 10 a.m., I found out exactly what she meant. My bank account was frozen. Every cent. My business cards bounced back, flagged for fraudulent activity. At first, I thought it was coincidence. Then I came home to find the front door of my apartment slightly ajar. The lock was cracked, the deadbolt torn. I walked in slowly. Papers, mine, scattered across the floor. Desk drawers overturned. The briefcase with the USB? Gone. But they didn't take everything. A letter sat dead center on the kitchen counter. No envelope. No signature. You shouldn't have gone after family. Reyes arrived 20 minutes later. She stood in the wreckage, shaking her head, then looked up at me. "They're not even pretending anymore," she muttered. "They don't have to," I said, scanning the empty briefcase. "They think they already won." I didn't tell her what scared me most. It wasn't the missing USB or even the bank accounts. It was how calm I felt, like something inside me had finally snapped into place. By noon, the retaliation was headline news. Meanwhile, Eli had his own problems. One of Tanya's interns tipped us off. Eli had been drinking heavily at his club the night before, loud, boasting to anyone who'd listen. "We buried that old man like we buried the books," he slurred to a room full of hedge fund boys. "Who's gonna prove anything now?" Tanya texted me immediately. "Get me proof. I'll air it." Reyes raised an eyebrow when I told her. "Kid doesn't know when to shut up," she said. "Then we'll make sure everyone hears him," I replied. But Reyes wasn't done playing devil's advocate. "If we release those files," she said as we drove toward Center City, "you'll burn it all down. Not just them. Thousands of jobs, contracts, retirement funds. You ready for that?" I didn't answer at first. Instead, I looked out the passenger window. For a moment, I saw the shop, Dad's old workshop. The memory of sawdust in the air. His big, rough hands turning wood into art. The way he smiled when he talked about things lasting. "I don't want to destroy it," I said finally. "Just clean the rot." "Then be precise," Reyes said, her voice firm, "because if you miss, they'll rebuild faster than you can stop them." Later that afternoon, I drove out alone, headed for the spot where Hale had lost control of his car. Route 30, guardrail at mile marker 52, the metal still bent where the impact hit. I parked just off the shoulder and walked down the embankment. I don't know what I was expecting. Closure, maybe. Or guilt. Maybe nothing. But then, half buried in the dirt near the bushes, something caught the sun. Small. Metallic. A dash cam chip. My pulse kicked up as I pulled it from the soil. Back in the car, I plugged it into my laptop. Grainy footage, the dashboard. Hale's voice, humming along to the radio. Then, headlights behind him, swerving, speeding. Another car forced him off the road. I hit pause, reversed, froze the plate. Clear as day. Eli Vale's custom license plate. That obnoxious gold-lettered one. V4L88. I exhaled slowly, sinking back into the seat. Phoenix 46 wasn't about money. It was insurance. They had buried my father's truth under legal jargon, fake boards, and fraudulent accounts. But Hale? He'd buried the real key in the dirt. That evening, as the sky turned a smoky orange over the river, I sat in my car overlooking the skyline. The city glowed like it always had, indifferent and beautiful. But something had shifted. This wasn't about inheritance anymore. It wasn't even about revenge. I whispered out loud, to no one, to my father, to the silence. "You told me to build something they couldn't rename. I think I finally understand." I opened my laptop, inserted the dashcam file, and hit upload. I didn't flinch. I didn't blink. Because by the time the progress bar hit 100%, I already knew there was no turning back. And by morning, one of us would no longer have a name worth keeping. That morning, the city seemed to hold its breath. Gray clouds hovered above Philadelphia's skyline like it knew something heavy was about to land. I sat on the steps of my building with a cup of black coffee, watching the streets stir to life, People rushing to work, dogs barking, delivery trucks unloading, the usual rhythm. Then the live broadcast began. The press conference was held at City Hall just after 10 a.m. They'd chosen the biggest chamber they had. High ceilings, stone pillars, all that pageantry Marjorie loved to surround herself with. She stood behind the podium like nothing could touch her. Her pearl earrings matched her perfectly pressed suit, and even her hair was pulled into that same severe bun she always wore when she was cornered. But her eyes, they'd lost their shine. "There have been outrageous lies spread about me and my family," she began, her voice steady but tight. "Baseless attacks designed to undermine our work in this city. But the truth..." Her microphone went silent. Not broken. Cut. A hush fell over the room. Behind her, the projector screen flickered on. The dashcam footage started playing. Gasps followed as Eli's car swerved into view, headlights flashing in the darkness, forcing Thomas Hale off the road. You could hear Hale shouting, then the static, then silence. Marjorie whipped around. "Turn that off!" But it was too late. Reporters stood up, shouting questions. Photographers snapped photo after photo. Someone yelled, "Mrs. Vale, is this your son's vehicle?" Eli, sitting a few rows back, jumped to his feet, stammering, "It wasn't supposed to." The sound of Marjorie's open palm slapping his cheek cracked across the room. He stumbled backward, stunned, and the cameras kept rolling. I stayed near the exit, hands in my coat pockets. Didn't speak, didn't move. She had once told me legacy was all about image. Well, this was hers. Within hours, the storm truly broke. Federal agents entered the Vail Foundation's downtown office by early afternoon. Computers seized, staff questioned. Marjorie and Eli were led out in cuffs. Him pale and trembling, her still trying to glare the cuffs off her wrists. The news networks played the video on loop. This time, they didn't just say Callum Reeves, they said Silas Reeves' son. Later that evening, Reyes called me. "You did it," she said quietly. "No," I replied. "I just finished what someone else started." The next day, I drove out to the estate. Legally, it was mine again now. The court order had come through faster than anyone expected. Guess truth has a way of speeding things up. Driving up the gravel path, the house looked smaller than I remembered. Age does that to places. The grandeur seemed faded, or maybe I'd just grown past it. Inside, dust floated through shafts of light. No staff, no polished silver, just echoes. I made my way to the workshop. That room was untouched, even after all these years. The scent of old cedar still lingered, faint but familiar. Tools hung where he'd left them. And in the middle of the workbench, the cracked leather briefcase sat quietly. I opened it again, even though I knew what was inside. Except, there was something I hadn't noticed before. A folded note, yellowing at the edges, tucked beneath his old business card. It read, "If you're reading this, you've already found what matters." It was never the money. It was the proof that you could stand taller than the ones who tried to bury you. Dad. I stood there for a long time. Didn't cry, but I let myself feel it. The weight, the loss, the strange peace that came with finally understanding. My eyes drifted across the workbench. One piece caught my attention. A half-finished wooden box, the last project he'd worked on. The chisel lay beside it. I picked it up. The final cut was clean. Just a corner joint, waiting for closure. My hands remembered how muscle memory passed down like something sacred. Then I carved one word on top. Phoenix. Same as the hidden file that unraveled the lies. I set it on the windowsill. The sun was starting to dip, glowing gold through the dusty glass. It hit the box just right. Warm, soft, quiet. A few hours later, I drove back into the city. As I passed the Vail Foundation's office, what was left of it, I noticed workers on a crane taking down the massive logo from the building's front wall. Beneath it, faint but still legible, the original name emerged. Reeves Trust. I didn't pull over, didn't need to. Some things don't need applause. Some victories speak best in silence. I didn't inherit my father's fortune. I inherited his unfinished fight, and finishing it was worth more than $46 million ever could be.